Well, hello and welcome, awesome students, to week 2 organizational psych consulting and analysis. And this week we're going to talk more specifically about some assessment tools that we might use when we start working with clients. A little bit of analysis we're going to do. IO psychology, industrial organizational psychology, really deals a lot with statistical information. We do a lot with surveys, we do a lot with assessments, and we just gather that information, make an analysis about what we see, provide some recommendations. And a lot of times it's going to involve you looking at some key information, identifying some problems, and then providing some type of presentation of the challenges that you see along with the recommendations that you would aspire to introduce to the company. A lot of times a project might start with just an overview or an analysis of what's going on. And then, of course, after you review the data, you're going to go back and do a presentation of the materials. And we're going to get into a little bit of that stuff this week. But before I do, certainly want to touch base on some of the things from this past week with regard to the assignments. I'm actually in the process right now of just starting to review the submissions from this past week. Again, I strongly encourage all students to get going on your submissions as soon as possible. I just happen to see a lot of submissions that came in very close to the deadline, shortly after the deadline in some cases. And so we want to make sure that you're working on things a little more proactively instead of allowing the week to pass by before you sit down at the computer on Sunday afternoon to start working on your assignments. As some of you are likely experiencing, some of these assignments are going to take you a little bit longer to do than others. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the reading materials, and I encourage all students to do the readings. Now, I want to tell you a little quick kind of story, a little reinforcement, if you will, in terms of the readings. Myself, a number of colleagues, other folks within the industry, we are often interviewing students for practicum placements, for internships. Certainly, we'll probably start seeing this as people graduate from their programs. But one of the things that I want to stress is we seemingly are starting to see students that are coming in to apply for, say, a residency program or for an internship or a practicum placement. And as we look at their transcripts and then we look at their information, start asking them some questions about diagnostic assessments or give them scenarios or ethics or things along those lines, sometimes students seemingly don't have some of the information they should readily have had they had actually done the coursework. And what I mean by that is make sure that you're putting the time into the readings, taking time to read the information, not just utilizing some of these things to add resources to your written submissions. If you have not actually read the article you're citing, that's typically a problem, gang. You want to make sure that you take some time to read the articles that you're utilizing for your research. It's not just about finding an answer online, but actually reading the articles, getting your information to address the questions from that, and you formally making some type of analysis of the information, providing some summary data. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment, but I really want to stress that because it's kind of evident in some of the submissions that students are utilizing a lot of resources or they're just doing little snippets here and there, but seemingly it doesn't appear as students are reading the weekly assigned readings as much as they should. Why do I say that? Is because it's quite odd that the question that they're wanting to answer is in an article that was contained in the weekly readings, and yet they didn't use those resources to answer the question, but found some articles online. So this is not necessarily a bad thing, gang, but make sure that you're putting the time into reading the materials. Quite honestly, in a lot of cases, it's going to be easier for you, particularly this week, as we dive into some of the information. And let's do that right now. As we talk about the week, we're going to get a little more into diagnostic tools as I talking about appropriate times to use these tools, kind of when you would use them, when you wouldn't use them, analyze a scenario based on a case analysis, which we're going to do a lot in this class, and summarize some of the main issues that you see within this organization. And so again, take a look at the module overview here. It'll give you a nice little insights about what we're talking about this week. So there are think about 5 or 6 things that you're going to want to review this week. And here is some of the different types of ways that we would gather data. Either we would do some type of case study, or we would gather expert opinion, or do a survey, or do interviews. Whatever the case might be, again, whatever is most appropriate for the particular situation. And this is just some summary information to kind of reinforce what these different tools or different resources would look like for you. There's some additional resources here in the back. Should you want to explore it further, I would encourage you to do so. Again, you're going to want to make sure that go through the reading materials this week. And again, when I stress going through the reading materials, gang, it's not just about reading the abstract, but actually downloading the article and taking a look at it so that you have that knowledge base. That's what's the most important thing here, that you know this content and that you understand it. And if you go through these articles, I think you're going to find that in many cases, it's going to help you to address the questions that you're looking at. So I'm just about ready to time out there. So again, another article that you're going to want to pull up. I don't think these readings are too, well, this one's probably a little meaty. So again, take some time, read through some of these materials. Again, there's just some different articles here you want to take a look at. So again, I can't stress this enough, gang. Make sure you're learning what you should be learning from this. And kind of tough sometimes. I know students get very busy and they tend to put things off. But if you're going online and searching for answers to questions, you're not really doing the research process correctly. You should be researching the topic, reading articles that help you gather information so that you have that knowledge base, and answering the question in your own words, of course, and then reinforcing your arguments with references that you've utilized for that particular submission. So let's talk about the assignments this week. Good news and bad news. The good news for some is that we don't have a discussion this week. The bad news is, of course, when we don't have a discussion, we typically have another assignment that's going to fill its place. And so there are 2 assignments this week, I think an activity and a milestone. I think some of you are going to see the milestones is where I put a lot of focus and a lot of attention on in terms of grading, making sure you guys are on track in terms of the concepts, in terms of the information that you should be gleaning from the class. And so I'm going to focus a lot of energy on that in terms of review and feedback. Things like the activities, those types of submissions, although important, it's an opportunity for you to have a little more fun with it. And in terms of grading and grading focus, I don't put a super high attention in terms of, wow, did they do this presentation correctly? And you'll see what I mean here in just a moment as I talk about some of these things. You're going to have an opportunity this week to make a visual presentation of the materials this week using a concept map. Now, some of you are not going to be very familiar with that. So just in short, if you're familiar with what a mind map is, or if you've ever seen an organizational chart, it's a little bit like that. Okay, so it's just a visual representation of the information, and there's some directions here or some suggestions here for a couple of tools you can use. Gang, I've personally used Canva on a number of occasions. You can certainly use it for this submission. The thing that I realized when I went into Canva is, although they have a lot of templates available to do this type of project, most, if not all of them, I did see a couple here and there that were free, but most of the templates are paid resources. So unless you want to pay to utilize the resource, Canva may not be a good option for you. Certainly you can do everything from scratch in Canva, but you may want to choose to use PowerPoint. This other tool right here, again, it was something I wasn't familiar with. It's more specific for mind mapping, and so it's a great tool, a great resource for this, but it is largely a paid resource. Again, there's some free options on some of these tools, but you can't export it, you can't save it, and so you're going to need to create some type of document, some type of PDF, something along those lines that you can actually upload to the class. And so again, unless you want to pay to utilize some of these resources, it may not be very helpful for you. Actually, some of the paid options weren't all that bad if it's a tool that you use. And it's some things you might want to take a look at, because if you're ever in a position where you're going to be doing these types of projects, this tool that makes mind maps, I think it was about $4 a month, would certainly be of value to you, but probably not just to do 1 or 2 assignments. Though you might find in some cases, if you poke around a little bit, there's probably some tools out there that might give you a free demo account or something like that if you want to take an opportunity to do some types of things like that for this particular assignment. That might help you. I'm looking for the submission here. As you go down to the bottom here, you'll see there is a template that you can utilize from Microsoft Word. And as I mentioned, if you're familiar with organizational charts or the organizational chart tool in Microsoft Word, which is what this is essentially what you're going to be developing for the class this week to address these questions. You could do something in Excel if you wanted to get really creative with that, but I would encourage you to use PowerPoint. It's a quick, easy tool. It's a great way to make organizational charts. And I'm sure if you see this template here, you'll get a good solid understanding of how to do this. You can, of course, use the template if you choose, but you can certainly make it on your own quite easily. And you want to address each one of the different types of assessment methods, whether it be a case study, expert opinion, focus groups, interviews, surveys, etc. And you're going to provide some scenarios, when you would use it, when you wouldn't use it. So just make sure and read through this information. This is probably not a super challenging assignment. Again, the bulk of the information that you need to address these questions is in the weekly readings. So just make sure you go through this material and you provide, again, scenarios where you would use it or when it may be inappropriate to utilize this. Take a little time to think about this, guys. You could give a very specific scenario and not just be, well, we could go out and ask a bunch of people their opinions on this particular matter. Be very specific about a scenario that you might want to use personal interviews with open-ended questions versus times when that might not be so effective for your particular situation. So again, so you have some ideas on that. The other assignment that we have going on this week is going to involve a little bit more of a case study, and this will take you a little more time to do. Again, I would encourage you to work on this first assignment this week. Gang, here's the reality. Most students complete their discussion posts. I mean, there's generally a few students that do it Monday, couple more Tuesday. By Wednesday, people start coming online, but a lot of students wait to do their discussion posts or do them, sometime between Wednesday night and Thursday night up until the last minute. A lot of submissions come in. So instead of putting both assignments off until the weekend, get at least this one done this week and submit it by Wednesday so you can have that out of your way. It shouldn't take you really any longer than it would take you to do a discussion post, a main discussion post. So do yourself a favor, get those done. If you notice, I'm really big on timelines, deadlines, because I do a lot of coaching and training in terms of leadership and personal growth. These are things that we do all the time, gang. And so if you want to be really successful in this type of field, it is important that you maintain good timelines and get things pushed out sooner rather than later. It's also really helpful to get on that mindset for graduate school, particularly students that might want to go into programs that focus on research. Very, very important. So with regard to the milestone this week, just wanted to make sure the correct terminology there. So you're going to want to go through a sheet here. And again, as I thought I was organized and then found myself not so organized, some background information about the company, along with some quantitative data and some qualitative data. Now, if you're a little confused on what the difference is, you probably didn't watch the video from this past week. I'd encourage you to go back to week 1. I think it was at the bottom of the resources. There was a link to a video that was available on YouTube that just talked about the differences between quantitative and qualitative data. So make sure you have a good, solid understanding. And you're going to provide a response to some of this information, addressing things such as finance and legal, operations, human resources, etc., relating to satisfaction these individuals had on the job. This is going to be a written document. I encourage you to do all these types of submissions in full APA formatting. It just talks about mainly, 12-point Times New Roman font, 1-inch margins, etc., which is the core of APA formatting. But also think more in terms of putting a cover page on there. And sometimes on some of these submissions, we would have students do like a summary or an executive summary. It's not needed for this. You might do a little introduction paragraph, would be very appropriate for this. But just be thinking more in terms of how you would present this information back, because the way your content looks is important, gang. So make sure you put a little time and energy into making a nice presentation. And if you put your submissions in APA format, this is not the class. On some of the submissions when we have projects and things of that nature, I do have an expectation that students will write in APA format. But the more that you do this, the more natural it will become for you to put your submissions in APA format. And it also gives me an opportunity to say, hey, you're completely on track, or hey, make sure you have a hanging indentation on your references, or make sure you put everything in double space. And I can give you a little feedback on that without any serious point implications. And so it's definitely to your interest to be doing this. As I always tell students, and I teach the capstone class, and one of the comments I frequently make is, in your next class, you all will soon be there. As many of you are probably in your 3rd and 4th year right now, you're going to soon be there where your next class is going to be a graduate program, where essentially every submission, or almost every submission that you turn in, is in APA format. And in some cases, you're going to literally have to have it in perfect APA formatting. Again, particularly for programs that focus a lot on research. And I know my program, I wrote dozens of papers in APA formatting, including my clinical research project at the end, which was over 300 pages, which I had to send out to have an editor go through everything and pay for it. And the more time they spent editing stuff, the more it cost me. And so it was to my best interest to make sure that I did as much as I could on my end, making it a little more efficient for them. So take a look at the rubric down below. You can see how this breaks down. But again, make sure you're putting the time and attention into each one of these. And I believe this should be about 4 or 5 pages. You have, 2 or 3 paragraphs really for each one of these. That's going to easily be probably 5 to 6 pages. So you shouldn't have any problem. And again, always keep in mind that references are important to support your arguments. Hopefully you know what that means. Make sure you're using primary and secondary sources, gang. And as I said earlier, take the time to actually read these articles, because mastery of the content is one of the most important things that you want to get from this experience. So I hope all of this made sense. If any of you are still needing to submit anything from week 1, please do that ASAP. Again, as I mentioned, I'm a stickler for deadlines, and I just want to keep it fair to all students. You all have the same amount of time to complete your assignments each week. And if you do take a little bit longer, then that is certainly an advantage over other students. And thus there will be a point penalty imposed for that. So do yourself a favor, get things done sooner rather than later. Always work ahead, so you never know what might happen tomorrow. I hope this video was helpful. If you do have any questions, reach out. I'll have grading done and updated as soon as possible, and we'll probably provide an additional follow-up announcement when that time comes. So have a fantastic week, gang. I look forward to seeing your submissions.